they don't take a public position, but they control it from behind the scenes. Your people like your Henry Kissingers, and these were real conspirators, but they're higher. They're just right below the whoever is secretly controlling them. For example, General James Jones of the U.S. Marine Corps was Barack Obama's national security advisor. The national security advisor almost always is a puppet president's handler. Okay.
Hmm.
At the Munich Security Conference, he stated, "At the National Security Council, we have a hierarchy." He said, "We get our daily marching orders from Henry Kissinger and Associates, passed down either through Brent Scowcroft or Sandy Berger." That's what he said. In fact, until a few years ago, it was on the CFR website. They still had the transcript of his speech admitting that. Now, that was proof of conspiracy.
Hey guys, welcome back to Capital Cause. Today I've got Joel Skousen back on the show from worldaffairsbrief.com. So Joel, thank you so much for coming on. Let's just dive right in. What is kind of like your overview right now? What is front and center for you when it comes to the, not just the economy, of course, but just the stuff that's going on, geopolitically, domestically? We have the Trump assassination attempt. We've got Biden dropping out. We've got Kamala Harris coming in. We've got a ton of stuff happening on the geopolitical front as well. So I'll let you go ahead and just kind of tell me what's front and center for Joel Skousen right now.
Well, right now it is that all of our predictions about the deep state control of Joe Biden and why they wanted him running for president are out the window now. I was questioning even why they ran him in the first place from his basement. He couldn't campaign. He had mental problems even then. And then when they made a strong attempt to run him again this next time, even after the disastrous debate performance, you see, there's been a lot of media control over, well, basically the word was out, you do not show Joe Biden's mental instability. You do not show us, you do not comment about it. And yet the dam broke with the CNN crew. Actually, it was PBS. The NewsHour crew was on CNN with the debate. And they uniformly, mildly criticized him, but it opened the floodgates. All of a sudden, everybody thought, oh, well, the clamp must be off and we're free to criticize now. And so the Democrat wave just became an avalanche against Joe Biden. And of course, the deep state handlers around Biden, who are different than your normal, left-wing Democrats who are aware that there's deep state control, but they don't really get deeply involved. They thought really they could push him out. But those handlers circled the wagons, and they were not going to say no until, of course, the Zelensky meeting where he called him President Putin. It was just so embarrassing. The avalanche finally won, and they decided to dump Biden. But the most disturbing thing is to pick giggling Kamala Harris, to replace him. I mean, I've always predicted that even if they still keep Joe Biden in for a presidential run, they got to replace the vice president. I mean, she's utterly incompetent. She was in charge. She was the border czar and failed miserably at that. Didn't do anything, actually. But, her speaking off the cuff is like a word salad. It's very, very confused, and it's just laughable. So this is the big problem that I'm facing now. How do you predict why they've got Gretchen Whitmer, they've got Gavin Newsom, they've got a lot of credible Democrats who are well-spoken. They've got a radical background like most Democrat candidates for president, but at least they're credible and they're well-spoken. And to put Kamala Harris in there, this makes me wonder,
right,
what are they trying to do? I mean, you had a chance to get rid of Biden and put in somebody else, and you pick Kamala Harris, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon behind her. So I suspect sabotage. I couple this with the change in Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump has never had good judgment about people. Because, he was never a conservative before he ran to president. He doesn't know any conservatives. He doesn't know any arguments. He lives by briefings. He doesn't do any homework himself. Basically, his briefings are from mainstream Republicans or the few deep state people that are still infiltrating his staff. But he watches Fox News. And you see, you can't tell who's deep state. You can't drain the swamp unless you know the history of the illegal operations that have been covered up under the guise of national security. In other words, you've got to know your conspiratorial facts in history and even the theory. And the reason, I'm probably the top national expert on conspiratorial facts in history, especially the big picture of the globalist, what their intents are in bringing us through two world wars, trying to get us into a new world order, and needing a third to get it done. But I can tell you that, it was very obvious to me, that James Comey was deep state, so was Robert Mueller. They were both involved in the 9/11 cover up, which was a deep state operation from beginning to end. And then they picked Christopher Wray and handed him to Biden, and he didn't know any better. Christopher Wray was also involved in the deep state cover up of 9/11. And then even Brett Kavanaugh, who Trump chose for the Supreme Court, is deep state, even though he's a conservative jurist. He was second in command to Ken Starr in the cover-up of the Vince Foster murder. He was specifically in charge of discrediting the one witness that could disprove the government case. So you see, it's no wonder that he and John Roberts are the go-to guys when the deep state wants them to vote an anti-conservative, like on vaccine mandates or against Texas use of sovereignty. They're the ones that go to. And of course, Amy Coney Barrett is starting to go down that route as well. I don't think she's directly controlled. There's no deep state history there, but she's so mainstream, it's easier to talk her into these things. So we really don't have a Supreme Court majority unless it's on something the deep state doesn't mind.
What about Kavanaugh? Didn't he have a deep state history as well?
Yeah, that's what I said. Brett
Oh yeah, yeah.
Kavanaugh was second in command to Ken Starr in the cover-up of the Vince Foster murder, calling it a suicide. And so, yes, he's got a deep state background as well. But the key thing that I'm worried about now, Danny, is what's happening to Trump. Trump thinks he's learned his lessons from the James Comey affair, which he didn't learn anything. Um, but he's thinking about putting, Jamie Dimon on as Treasury Secretary. He's keeping, Jerome Powell at the Fed. He's being talked into a lot of things. But the worst decision he's made so far, the very worst, is picking J.D. Vance as his vice president. Now, this is an establishment-made candidate. He's not a conservative. Can you imagine going to Yale Law School and having the time to write a book? It just doesn't happen unless you've got a ghostwriter or something that the establishment's paying for and providing. And then you make it into an Academy Award-winning movie, of Hillbilly Elegy, even something that left-wing Hollywood isn't even interested in promoting, and you give it an Academy Award. I mean, this really stinks. Then you pick up Peter Thiel and other big tech people, hire him. He goes through several. He goes through several law firms that have been used by Hillary Clinton and the Obamas and other things. These are not conservative law firms, and then he's anti-Trump from 2016 to nearly 2020. Calling him an idiot and immoral, which he is immoral, and then suddenly he becomes an acolyte of Donald Trump all of a sudden, and Trump picks him. I mean, this is extremely bad judgment to see this. Hard-line conservatives like those in the Freedom Caucus, the very small group of some 20 congressmen in Congress that are really hardcore conservative, they don't get promoted by the deep state. They don't get promoted by the establishment. They don't have movies made about them telling their history. So I'm very suspicious of J.D. Vance and the fact that, Trump is his election to lose, as the establishment is saying now. And, before I was absolutely certain they were going to steal the election from Donald Trump again, and even with Biden in there. But I'm not so sure now. In fact, my son-in-law said to me, it's probably time not to make any predictions at all. It's so unstable,
Right.
what's going on right now. And so, but I'm going to talk about some of the possibilities. There's, I think this assassination attempt of Donald Trump threw a ringer into the deep state plans. I had even hypothesized that one of the possible reasons for keeping Joe Biden in there is to assassinate him after the election. Or choose
Mm.
a new vice president, the one you really want to run the country, assassinate him after and blame it on the Trump people who would be mad as hell because the election was stolen again. But when you've had one botched assassination attempt, it becomes very difficult now to do another one right on the piggyback on top. I mean, Miss Cheadle, who has resigned already as head of the Secret Service because of that botched job. I'm just not sure. I feel strongly that the deep state is a little bit in disarray because things have not gone the way that they want. But I'm very suspicious when they picked Kamala Harris. This is not a competent candidate for president. Donald Trump will make mincemeat out of her in any debate. So, turning, let me see if you want to respond to any of that, first of all.
Yeah. Do you think they're keeping Kamala in just so she won't upset her key voting blocks, minorities, and the women voting bloc? Because I think that if they kind of just skip right over her without kind of like finessing something, they may let her have in the limelight now up until the DNC. But I think it's also important that Obama still hasn't endorsed her. And it just came out today that Obama thinks that she can't beat Trump. So that's why he hasn't endorsed her. Do you think that they're she's kind of like a placeholder until they kind of pivot over to someone else by the time the DNC rolls around? Could that be
Yeah,
something?
as I say, anything could happen, but I'll tell you, I am just incredulous that they would stick with Kamala Harris. Now, there a lot of conservatives think that Barack Obama is running the Biden administration. That's not true at all. Barack Obama was a puppet as well. Remember, he was a communist organizer making about 60 grand a year until the globalists basically said, "We want you to join our team. We'll make you a senator. We'll make you wealthy." And they have. Is worth over $20 million now. How do you get $20 million after working? You've never made over $150,000 a year. Just impossible. Unless you have insider trading deals like most of the controlled people in Congress, Hillary Clinton, et cetera. That's how you get wealthy, but only if you're part of the deep state or at least part of the globalist conspiracy. And so anything could happen still at the Democratic National Convention. And, they're talking up Brashears as a vice presidential pick.
And
He's
Shapiro.
a problem. He was put in through election theft in Kentucky. That was visible right on the television screen. You saw vote flipping right on the screen,
Mm.
and then they took it away 10 or 15 seconds later. But in any case, it's worth watching what's going to happen. Now, in terms of the assassination, there's a lot of rumors out there, and I'm an expert in conspiracy, but there's a lot of bogus conspiracies out there. And in last week's World Affairs Brief, and your listeners can still get a free sample copy of that by going to worldaffairsbrief.com and clicking on Request a Sample on the left-hand side. That covers the assassination without the second shooter issue. Now, it's my estimation. Now we know, of course, that only about half of Trump's security team were actually Secret Service. The rest had been taken away to handle Jill Biden's presentation in Pittsburgh that day. So there were a lot of stand-ins going in there. There were two sniper teams to the left and the right of Donald Trump behind him. But it's interesting, most of the people who made erroneous conclusions about the assassination failed to take into account that there was a major tall tree between the shooter and the snipers.
Hmm.
And he positioned himself just so that the tree blocked his view, the view of the snipers from him, but he could still see Trump. And that's when the first three shots went out that hit Trump and killed Campione and two other bystanders, and injured a couple of bystanders. Now, the big news this week is that there is sound analysis of the 5 shots that followed. And Chris Martenson, who's a pretty PhD, pretty good expert. I don't know if you've seen his video,
Mm-hmm.
but he makes one major mistake in this video. He concentrates on the data, the sound difference between the first three shots. And unfortunately, he's using video from a moving microphone on a cell phone, which isn't the best. In fact, when you hear the video from the person next to the stand, the shots aren't that different, but there is some difference. And they can't, but what he fails to see is that those additional five shots are so rapid fire, pop, 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 they cannot be a sniper. They cannot be a second shooter.
Mm.
If you've ever shot long distance, you cannot reacquire a target in rapid fire. You're just blasting. That's for short range, 10, 20 yard stuff. Aim and bap, 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 as fast as you can pull the trigger. But you don't do sniper things. The sniper shots were just about as fast as you can get to reacquire a target with the telescopic sense. So that's the big thing, and he misses. Oh, there's a second shooter because it's a second sound of a rifle and it's in the window, etc. Here's what I think it is. And one of the things that we're lacking on this, we're lacking any of the ballistics. We're lacking the number of shell cases on the roof that would have pertained to Crooks. We're lacking the ballistics analysis of the bullet out of the dead person if it matches the rifle that they got from Crooks. We don't have any of that information. But I bet that the snipers, which were in the second story building right behind Crooks, fired the five shots and killed him. And I think the autopsy, if we ever see it, will show he's got 5 rounds in his body, or 4 at least, if they hit him every time. And maybe one headshot, because you see, as I explained in last Friday's brief, when Trump went down, he went down behind a big black speaker box. And so Crooks had to roll to the right-hand side to be able to see past the speaker shot to get another shot in at Trump. But that put him in view of the far sniper. And that's when he shot at him. Now, we don't know if he had a hit yet or whether or not he was killed from the 5 shots that followed after. But I can tell you those 5 shots were not from a second shooter. You simply cannot shoot long distance. And in addition, there would be 4 or 5 other victims out there if you were shooting at Trump, and they're not. Every one of those rounds is accounted for, of the 3 rounds, including hitting 2 and a hydraulic line on the stand behind him. But those 5 shots are somebody close range, probably Secret Service, or not Secret Service, but the Butler County snipers that were in the second story window firing on him. And why didn't they fire on him before? Well, it's possible that they were simply trying to get clearance, asking if this was a part of your security team or that, because there were Secret Service, there was semi-Secret Service, and then there's Butler County with mercenary snipers along. So even though they had a common tactical frequency, it's just not clear. And in fact, it's unconscionable to me that nobody has said that tactical frequency recording was recorded. I mean, that would tell us an awful lot, because the policeman who boosted another policeman up on the roof, or up to at least put his hands on the roof and stick his head up, said that the guy, aimed his rifle and he dropped back down because he couldn't reach it. And he immediately called on the tactical frequency, shoot around the roof. And we don't know how long it took from that time until he started shooting, but I think it's only a matter of less than a minute, because if Crooks knew that police knew he was up there, he'd have to put out his shots as quickly as he could. So I don't see a Secret Service conspiracy, but I do think that there's a probable case that some deep state handler was behind Crooks, because he had explosives in his van, and he had an electronic detonator, and he had absolutely no skills involved in explosives or electronics. So somebody had to provide that for him. Anyway, that's my view of the assassination attempt. Trump's lucky to be alive, and he's more popular than ever now. And it's a nice setup for a Trump election. And if they don't steal it from, and they certainly can, remember, they still have all the tabulation computers connected to the internet. It doesn't have to be Dominion, doesn't have to be the contractors. Anything that's connected to the internet can be changed. And not to mention, voting ballots can be dumped, as they were in 2020, by the truckload. And that's mostly how they stole the election. Though there was hacking, I covered that in the World Affairs Brief, November 20th of 2020. Now, someone hacked into the Edison Research Data Bank, who compiles all the state results and feeds it to the television networks. And that showed hundreds of thousands of votes that were flipped from Trump to Biden, and hundreds of thousands of votes that were actually disappeared for Donald Trump came in, didn't get registered in his column. So that was the quantitative evidence that was never used by Trump's attorneys to win their cases. I don't know why, except that he picked Rudy Giuliani as his attorney, and he's deep state. He was involved in 9/11.
Yeah, yeah. So Joel, oftentimes when we talk about the deep state or we hear about the deep state, we tend to think of it in terms of a monolith. But don't you think that it's more of a conglomeration of different factions? So if it is, then what faction of the deep state stood to benefit the most given the timing? I mean, I tend to look at it was 2 days before the RNC. The RNC, if they were successful, the RNC could have just nominated Nikki Haley or anyone else that they could have deemed worthy. Uh, who exactly in the deep state do you think stood to benefit the most there?
Well, remember that the deep state is not, as many people think, it's not leftover bureaucrats who are Democrats who are trying to sabotage a Republican president. Yes, those people exist. There are a lot of leftover bureaucrats that are permanent tenure within the government, but the deep state is the enforcement arm of the larger globalist conspiracy.
Mm.
It's the enforcement arm. They do dirty tricks, illegal acts, covert operations. They have their own separate source of funding, and Congress, knows very little about it. But they are embedded in every law enforcement agency, federal government. They're in there's a dark side of the CIA that does, killed JFK, Martin Luther King, RFK, even bodyguards. There's a dark side of the Secret Service. There were two Secret Service agents involved in the JFK assassination that stepped off the limousine to get out of the shot, that they knew was coming. That doesn't mean all Secret Service is, but they have people in every DEA. They import drugs, and the white side of the DEA prosecutes for drugs. CIA, as I say, DHS has a dark side. But every agency head has to be a dark side operator because they have to control the dark side as well as the white side and keep them separate so that the white side doesn't find out about what the dark side is doing. Now, about factions, the true deep state, the ones that do illegal acts, there are no factions there. These are mercenaries. These are kill men. These are lawyers and other things that do the weaponization at the DOJ, et cetera. There are no factions there. They take orders. But they don't necessarily know the bigger picture. There are, for example, let's take the World Economic Forum, for example, with their AI robotic agenda, Mr. Harari talking about transhumanism and no soul and computer chipping individuals. This is something that's probably not going to ever happen because they don't know about the larger war agenda that is right around the corner. And the globalists are pushing for that war. It's going to be a nuclear preemptive strike on U.S. military targets. The trigger event will probably be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan and North Korea piggybacking on that against the U.S. if we try to interfere, as Kim Jong-un has threatened to do. And we have to intervene if Kim Jong-un strikes South Korea, because we have 26,000 troops there. And of course, if we strike North Korea, they have a alliance with China to come to their rescue, and that would probably trigger preemptive nuclear strikes on U.S. military, not cities. The communists, continuing Soviets, and the Chinese don't want to destroy the Western infrastructure. They want to destroy the military and then blackmail us into submission. So, speaking from a financial point, one of the things that is really disturbing to me with financial people is their continuing attempt to plan 10 and 15 years out in the future, big projects, big capital projects and things, building projects. They don't have a clue that war's coming and to shut everything down because it's going to begin with an EMP strike. There will be no electricity for a year because we don't stockpile any of the long distance transformers that will be blown out in an EMP strike. And so even if you can get the generators operating again, you can't transfer it long distance, and it acts like a battery. You have excess capacity. You can't regulate a nuclear power plant very easily, or a coal fired. It's on or off, and you need that big battery of the net of the grid to absorb that extra electricity and shuttle it from one place to another. So it's just very hard to me believe how short-sighted financial people are. They foresight on the markets and predicting the markets, but they're not looking at the bigger picture of this war that we're facing with Russia and China.
Yeah. So before we head on over to the geopolitical front, I want to cover one more
Yeah.
thing on the domestic front. So, in regards to Trump's reaction to the assassination attempt, there's been talk that he's hired Eric Prince of Blackwater to take care of his private security. I don't know if you've heard of this or not. Can he trust Blackwater? I mean, aren't they deep state as well? I mean, like, isn't
Well,
that the entire problem?
certainly, yeah, yeah. Blackwater was certainly deep state. Eric Prince has had several interviews since then where he's very conservative and seems to have withdrawn from that. He's never admitted, I was working for the deep state, et cetera, but he's giving the appearance at least that he was withdrawn. Now, I don't think anyone ever withdraws from the deep state with a clean bill of health. So I'm very skeptical of Eric Prince, but he is giving a very conservative point, and maybe it's to, get into the good graces of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, is going to get full Secret Service protection now after this fiasco. Now, RFK, for example, Jr., is having to pay for all his security. I was speaking at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas where he showed up. Boy, a full retinue of security people, iron gates around his podium so that nobody could rush the stage. It was an impressive amount of security, and he left right after his speech.
I see.
So I don't know how much truth there is or how much need for that is. He may well distrust the Secret Service after this, but at the RNC, there were no women on his team that time like there were before.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think Trump's biggest problem the last time he was in office, to many of his followers, was his personnel choices? Now, looking at some of the people that he's associated with this time around, it doesn't really seem like he's really learned his lesson when it comes to personnel. So, if he does get elected, do you have any hopes that anything changes from the first administration? Are you in the market for gold and silver? Then, if so, please consider Miles Franklin. They are my gold and silver dealer of choice. So, not only do they have super competitive prices that you're going to have a really hard time finding elsewhere, but then they also have top notch customer support. I know Andy Schechtman, the owner of Miles Franklin, top notch guy. I wouldn't be recommending them to you if I didn't have faith in their product. But what you really want to do, however, you want to email them at info@milesfranklin.com, and you want to say that Capital Cosm sent me in the description line, because when you do that, you can get access to their special pricing sheet. You want to get that special pricing sheet because you're going to get special prices that you won't find on the website itself. So email them at info@milesfranklin.com. Tell them that Capital Cosm sent you, and you won't be heckled with spam emails, etc. There's no commitment necessary. I promise you that. And with that said, I will let you get back to the video.
No, I have absolutely no hope at all. Um, if I were his advisor, for example, I could, give him a lecture in 2 hours that would make him realize how little he knows and how he cannot trust anything mainstream without checking with a conspiracy expert to see if he's got a deep state background. And you have to know these illegal acts of government to know if a person's deep state. And now there are things that I'm sure up and coming people in the deep state that I wouldn't know about because they haven't maybe participated in anything yet. But you can track, certain things like J.D. Vance and his promotion by the establishment, which never happens to a true conservative. But Donald Trump, by far, even exceeding his bad choices, which aren't his choices. Basically, he's picking somebody that his surrounding staff tells him. And these people know nothing about conspiracy unless they're part of it, and then they won't tell him anyway. But unfortunately, Donald Trump has a big ego, and he's very subject to flattery. Now he dishes it out as well, called Hillary Clinton a wonderful person at one time, and others, and they flatter him back. When Xi Jinping first met Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, he flattered him so much that Donald Trump thought he was just a wonderful person. And to this day, when Xi Jinping wrote to him about how sorry he was about the assassination, he talked about Xi Jinping, brilliant, brilliant. He rules with an iron hand, and how is that brilliant? That's ruthless, not brilliant. But he's a flatterer. So Xi Jinping gets back to Beijing and calls Kim Jong Un and says, when you meet with Donald Trump, just flatter him and he'll be putty in your hands. And he was. He came away vowing that he was going to destroy or take away North Korea's nuclear weapons, either by diplomacy or military action, and came away thinking that Kim Jong Un was best pen pal. Absolutely ridiculous. And then to think that I can call Vladimir Putin within 24 hours, I can end the Ukraine war, is just sheer lunacy. The man doesn't understand their systematic evil. He doesn't understand that the Soviets faked their own demise. The communists went underground. They did it to get aid and trade. It wasn't a spontaneous revolution. Moscow gave orders to Erich Honecker in Germany to stand down the Stasi and let the student protests go forward. It gave orders to the KGB to stand down and not arrest any of the protesters in Red Square listening to Yeltsin. I mean, I could go on. I have all the details about why it was a phony fall. In fact, Putin even admitted to Tucker Carlson. Of course, he knows nothing about conspiracy, so it went right over his head. He told him, he said, the Russian hierarchy initiated the fall of the Soviet Union. And Tucker didn't understand what he was saying. He didn't understand the official narrative is it was spontaneous, that they couldn't control it. And he admitted, we did it on purpose. And he lied to him again, said we wanted peace with the West, we wanted cooperation, but actually it was a ruse to get aid and trade, and that's what they got. We rebuilt their entire oil industry after the phony fall of the Soviet Union. And now he's back trying to reconstitute it. He admitted to Tucker Carlson, he said, Lenin and Stalin got together and decided to put the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass and Crimea into the borders of Ukraine. I don't know why, he said, but of course he knew why. They knew that they were going to fake their own demise. Lenin had tried it once and it worked to get aid to Russia, and they were going to do it again. And this provided the excuse to come back in and retake Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened. And he put hundreds of thousands of Russians into the Baltic states. They'd be next if Ukraine falls to Russians. So it's a grand deception. It's one of the three grand deceptions in the worldwide history that we have. Pearl Harbor was a major one. 9/11 was a major grand deception. COVID, and then this phony fall of the Soviet Union. That's four major deceptions that have gone on. And unfortunately, conservatives have fallen for this. They think Putin's a Christian. They think he's anti-woke, that he's trying to undo our globalist deep state so that he can give us liberty. And it's a very naive understanding.
Yeah, I want to take it back to J.D. Vance for a second. I mean, speaking of deception,
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, mentee of Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel backed him in his Ohio campaign to the tune of $10 million. And why that's important? Well, Peter Thiel is the founder of Palantir, and Palantir is their government contractor to the CIA. And they essentially built out this software as a service package that helps them identify subversives, right-wing and left-wing subversives. And in fact, they even bragged about how they were able to identify the J6ers in rapid fashion just based off of the video footage and just matching it with like facial recognition data from Facebook.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the guy you have in your VP slot, guys. Like if you're a Trump supporter, I mean, this is the same guy, that was, rubbing shoulders with the founder of Palantir.
Yeah, it's that's what I'm really worried. If they don't steal the election from Donald Trump, then it doesn't mean that Donald Trump is a deep stater and he's fooling the conservatives. He's just too easy to manipulate. They manipulated all through, his USMCA, replacement of NAFTA with TPP in disguised in clothing. He didn't understand that he had been snookered on that. He made so many mistakes, and he did a lot of right things. The oil industry was opened up; it was very, very good for oil industry and that. And he did a certain amount on the border. But you remember, it was the Republican leadership that wouldn't give him the funding.
Mm.
Well, of course, the Democrats kept blocking, but the Republican leadership also blocked the funding as well. And that's what conservatives need to understand. The Democratic Party is totally controlled by the deep state, but the Republican Party is controlled at the very top levels. Uh, Mitch McConnell is deep state. Lindsey Graham is deep state, globalist. And every one of the House speakers, Paul Ryan, John Boehner, and Kevin McCarthy, have been in the globalist camp. And suddenly, Mike Johnson came from being a conservative, and then he became a yes man to the system after he became speaker. I don't know how they bent his ear, but they did. Nobody's allowed to be Speaker of the House when Republicans are in office unless they toe the line.
What about Elon Musk? What do you make of Elon Musk? He did open up free speech on Twitter, but could that just be a honeypot just
He
to
did.
get everyone killed?
He's a wild card though. He's got a shady background, both with his wife, who's into some weird philosophies and satanic organization and other things. He just doesn't have a real conservative background, but he's doing some good things. He's certainly doing a lot of good things with his space
SpaceX.
rockets, although that's I think a wasted effort of money going out to Mars and further and beyond. But nevertheless, I don't trust anyone unless they've got a solid conservative background and that they understand conspiracy. You've got to understand conspiracy in order to get on the right. I mean, Ron Paul's a good friend of mine, but Ron Paul doesn't think there's any enemies outside the United States because of what happened in the war
Mm.
on terror, because we attacked innocent Iraq and Afghanistan. They didn't understand. He doesn't understand the conspiratorial issues of why the deep state did all that to create all those millions of refugees to flood Europe and destroy Western culture. Europe is now 25% Muslim on average and 60% Muslim in Belgium. And it's literally destroying you know, the
Yeah.
culture there.
Yeah, social cohesion. So moving to a geopolitical standpoint,
Yeah.
you just recently had Ukraine, Zelensky, trying to signal for peace with Russia. They just Ukraine just had, or one of the ambassadors of Ukraine just had a meeting with another representative of China, and they kind of made these signals that they were ready to negotiate with Russia in the process. So, what do you think is going on there? Are they just trying to just trying to get trying to play hardball with the West, telling them, "Well, hey, we're about to make peace with Russia. You may not get your war if we don't get more money." Is that what they're doing? Or is there something
Yeah,
else to it?
yeah, no, that's very possible. Putin's got a hard line there. I want what I've taken, and of course, this whole thing about Ukraine not joining NATO. This is a bogus thing. Remember, in the phony fall of the Soviet Union, they never purged out of the former Soviet states the communist bureaucracy and the communist spies, etc. Never purged any of them. That's why there was so much corruption in Ukraine, is because of all the leftover communists. I know people in Ukraine, they still complain that you still have to pay bribes after the fall of the Soviet Union to the same people who are communists. They're still in power. And then look at Poland. Lech Walesa of Solidarity turned out to be a Soviet agent. They were playing the West about this free market labor union type thing. And Lech Walesa was a Soviet agent in Czechoslovakia. So he's got to have still a lot of spies in NATO because all of those countries have joined NATO. He doesn't mind if Ukraine's part of NATO. You just have more spies telling him what's happening. And the key thing is though that Vladimir Putin cannot nuke the West, despite 10 threats now about nuking the West. He cannot do it because he can't occupy. A lot of people don't understand the military significance of that. That when you can't occupy, but eastern Ukraine, not even all of Ukraine, he just doesn't have the troops and the manpower, let alone Eastern Europe, let alone the United States. He has to wait for China. to do a nuclear strike on the West. And that's why they are in tandem now. They know they're going to go after it after they take down the West, or so they think, because Russia doesn't transfer any new technology to China because they're afraid of China being stronger than they are now, and China will be stronger soon, except for the nuclear arsenal. But so this whole thing is going to come down when China's ready. That is World War III. And business people ought not to be making any long term plans, period, especially if it has to do with digital currency or, you know, cyber currency, et cetera. Without a stable supply of electricity in an EMP strike, and there'll be no internet, you won't have access to any of your banking, any of your finance, any of your cyber currency, et cetera.
What are your thoughts on
So,
gold, Joel? What about
well,
stocking
gold,
gold?
gold and silver is highly manipulated. People are touting the rise recently, but you remember that gold was $30. I bought gold, unfortunately, at the high point, must have been over 10, 12 years ago when it was $30 an ounce, and it's just now crossing $30 an ounce. It's just, how has that happened with 2 years of 15 plus or 10 to 15% inflation? Gold is rising at 4 to 5%. The only way they can do that in because traditionally the hard metals are really a good hedge against inflation, except they've been able to manipulate and keep the price down. I personally think they've got a system, the top gold dealers, where they sell on the open market and they buy back privately and then reimburse for the sell. I don't know any other way where you can keep the price down as much as they've had in the past 5 and 6 years, especially during the high inflation years, without a one-way sell and then a hidden buyback regime.
I see. Well, staying on the geopolitical front, we have been hearing these new statements about reinstating the draft in these NATO countries. Even here in the United States, just about a month ago, they were talking about reopening the draft automatically to enlist soldiers or 18 to 26 year olds into the military to draft them, and that would also include women. My question to you is, what does this portend to? How close are we towards a boots on the ground type of scenario where American troops, NATO troops, are going to have to get their hands dirty? And a lot of my audience, and a lot of my audience is a lot older than 1826, so they may think they may not have anything to worry about. But then I look at like what they're doing in Ukraine, right? I mean, they're drafting 60-year-olds onto the front lines. So could it be possible that they in enlarge that the age bracket beyond the 18 to 26-year-old age bracket, or how does that work, Joel, from your knowledge?
Well, remember the top globalists who control the deep state, most of whom don't know about the war. They follow the news, and if the news isn't worried about an imminent strike from Russia and China, then they're not worried. You've had so many false threats from Putin. People are pretty well immune to it by now. But all the deep state people know that war is coming because they want it. Now, that's something that your audience need to understand, that the Russians and Chinese want it. They want to take down the United States military. They want to control. They want to do a new world order that they control, and it'll be ruthless. You don't want to live under the continuing Soviets or the Chinese occupation. But Americans don't understand our own leaders want it. And the proof of that is in 1997, they signed a complete revamping of our nuclear response posture called Presidential Decision Directive 60, which is still in force. It's top secret, but it was leaked out what was in it in the Arms Control Today website. You can still find it, November 1997 archives, armscontroltoday.org, an article by Craig Cernillo talking about, or debunking what the New York Times and Washington Post said about, well, don't worry about PDD 60. We can still launch on warning. It says, no, you can't. It absolutely bans launching on warning. It dictates to our military forces they absorb a nuclear first strike and then launch afterwards. And General Butch Neal of the Marine Corps said, launch with what? You got half of our submarines in port at any one time, probably two-thirds, and none of the warheads on these submarines can hit hardened targets. They can hit cities, but that's not our nuclear doctrine. So what do you retaliate with? You see, launch on warning is very effective because it means when our satellites detect Russian, Chinese launching, we launch our missiles, their missiles hit empty silos, and ours can be reprogrammed in flight to hit live targets. So the one who launches second in a launch on warning scenario wins the war, at least in terms of the first strike. But PDD 60 indicates that we're going to absorb a nuclear first strike. And I think that is an indication that our globalists, who are building a lot of new bunkers themselves, they know this war is coming. They're inviting it, they're provoking it, they want it to happen. They'll come out of their bunkers and say, our military's been half of it's decapitated. We're going to have to join in a militarized global government in order to prosecute the war. And Europe right now is funding secretly, mostly secretly, a new EU army to replace NATO. Because there's going to be a new world order after that, a new militarized global government. And I think the EU army is going to be the seed stock for that military rebuild. Now, how do you rebuild after you've absorbed a nuclear first strike? Well, I think my theory is that the U.S. has, in fact, built space-based interceptors, Brilliant Pebbles and other things theorized during the Reagan administration. And even though this would be top secret, General Mattis, who resigned during the Trump administration as defense secretary, spoke at a Booz Allen Hamilton secret investment conference. It was leaked that he said, you'd be surprised how many billions are going into space that aren't on the budget. Now think about that. All the GPS satellites are on the budget. All the spy satellites are on the budget. All the other space operations and Elon Musk, all that's on the budget. So what's left? Got to be some secret operations going there. And, if you have space-based interceptors that can intercept any further nuclear missiles aimed at our cities, then you can thumb your nose at their blackmail and say, you hit the military, that's what they want. It drives us into a militarized global government in response. And then you stop any further nuclear attacks from occurring so that you can rebuild. Anyway, this is very speculative at this point, but I'll tell you, the globalists are not stupid. They're inviting a war. I'll guarantee there's going to be a nuclear first strike against our military, and they're not stupid. There's going to be a response. They're not going to intend to lose this war. But the big problem is with an EMP strike, I don't know how you knit a country back together after a year without electricity. Can you imagine the businesses are all kaput and nobody's got food, you've got starvation, you've got a Mad Max scenario. The cities are deadly now. People are fleeing the cities. And that's why I wrote the book Strategic Relocation. You've got to think these things through, and you've got to be prepared to get out of the big cities and into safer rural areas to survive this stuff.
Right, right. Joel, who do you think sits at the top of the pyramid? People could have often said Henry Kissinger, but he's passed away. David Rockefeller, but he's passed away. You're left with a lot of these nouveau elites lately. A lot of the old guard's kind of gone. You said a Rothschild, he passed away earlier this year. So who do you think sits at the top?
Well, we don't know, and we'll never know because they don't take a public position, but they control it from behind the scenes. Your people like your Henry Kissingers, and these were real conspirators, but they're higher. They're just right below whoever is secretly controlling them. For example, General James Jones of the U.S. Marine Corps was Barack Obama's national security advisor. The national security advisor almost always is a puppet president's handler. Okay. At the Munich Security Conference, he stated, "At the National Security Council, we have a hierarchy." He said, "We get our daily marching orders from Henry Kissinger and Associates, passed down either through Brent Scowcroft or Sandy Berger." That's what he said. In fact, until a few years ago, it was on the CFR website. They still had the transcript of his speech admitting that. Now, that was proof of conspiracy because Henry Kissinger had no position in government at that time. We get our daily marching orders from Henry Kissinger and Associates, passed down through Sandy Berger or Brent Scowcroft. Those were Kissinger's associates. They had no right to be giving daily marching orders to the National Security Council. But that shows that there is a conspiracy. And right now, Barack Obama or Joe Biden is controlled by a very large group of advisors, chief of which is Jake Sullivan, who's national security advisor, probably the top handler. But there's got to be other people. When you got a senile president, somebody's got to watch over falling over, and another person's got to watch for the drugs that he pump him up with, and other people have to write the speeches. And there's a whole cadre around him, and it's very tightly controlled. Forget about Jill, his wife; she's not running. You know, the deep state is controlling Joe Biden and very easily Kamala Harris as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we'll never know who are the secret leaders. You know, we in the phony fall of the Soviet Union, we only found out about who the true communist leaders were behind Gorbachev when Boris Berezovsky came out of the woodwork and his other things and made themselves the new oligarchs and made themselves well. How did they get to be wealthy? Because they were the ones who had the power to tell the state central bank to loan them the money to buy Gazprom, to buy the oil concessions, to buy all the things that make an oligarch. Nobody else could tell the state bank to loan them the money. And Boris Berezovsky takes charge of the Commonwealth of Independent States now, CIS. And, insiders within Kremlin said, we saw a meeting where Yeltsin stepped aside and let Boris Berezovsky in the room first. That's a sign that he was the leader. Well, Putin, when they brought him to power to replace Yeltsin, eventually had Berezovsky killed in London. He had him assassinated. And so you had kind of a Stalin-esque type takeover of the Soviet Union to get rid of the hidden oligarchs. And Putin now established a whole new set of oligarchs that rumor has it that they pay him 4% of their ill-gotten gains, and making Putin probably the wealthiest of the oligarchs in Russia.
I see. I see. Well, Joel, what I've been doing the last several episodes of this podcast is I've been opening the door for my guests to ask a question to my next guest. So if there's a question you'd like to ask my next guest, what would it be?
Well, you're asking a person who probably knows more than any of your other guests, and so it's not a matter of me asking them questions. You know, they ought to be asking me, what's the deep state, next move. I'm at the top of the pyramid in terms of knowledge of the underground, what's going on. I don't listen to other advisors anymore because they have very little to teach. In fact, I don't deal in the normal economic things because I'm not invested. It's going to go down. And people who are invested in paper and other things are going to lose everything if they're not. If you haven't eliminated your future need for money when this EMP strike comes, and I mean that, eliminated by stockpiling, nothing you have, whether it's gold or silver. I mean, can you imagine trying to trade a gold $2,000, $2,500 gold coin for some food and other things? How are you going to get change for that?
Yeah.
And who can recognize whether it's a real gold coin? And
Your best bet is probably junk silver. Just old.
No, not junk silver. Brand new silver dollars are probably your best barter item. Because junk silver, you're going to have trouble convincing someone that's junk silver dollars worth $30. But a brand new Silver Eagle, yeah, you can convince somebody it's probably worth $30. But still, cash is going to be king, believe it or not, when the grid goes down, because everybody accepts it and they're not going to be printing anymore right for a while. So forget about inflation. Cash will be king. So stockpile some cash. But the most important thing is eliminate your future need of money by stockpiling everything that you normally buy. And that means you've got to have high security shelters. You've got to have high security concealed places to stockpile that stuff, or it's going to get pillaged when people come marching down the street, breaking into homes.
Yeah, yeah. I remember you mentioned this in the last interview we did. Basement is definitely key if you can't afford a shelter for that. So my question for my last guest to you was from Chris McIntosh, and he wants to know:
10 years out, you got one trade you can make. So we just go back to portfolio, forget about all the other stuff. You got to put something away for 10 years. What's it going to be?
Um, Well, I've just made all my money in real estate. Real estate keeps going up, and there's three types of commercial real estate that may survive the war,
Hmm.
and that is triple net lease to either government, medical, major medical, or utilities, because those will have an angle on government funding and will continue to pay their leases, if anything will. Now, all games are up in the short, medium term, if the grid goes down. But as I say, my biggest investment is stockpiles, ultimately, because what you don't possess, I mean, these people, for example, have gold and silver stockpiled in Switzerland or in Panama, or how are they going to get it? How are they going to get access to it when there's
Yeah.
not even any
Possession is
telephone?
9/10 of the law
It
at that
just,
point.
you got to possess it. So I can't emphasize enough. That's why I wrote the book, The Secure Home and the High Security Shelter Book. You've got to have secure shelter. Forget about these vaults that you pay somebody else to. Nobody's going to be there to open those vault doors for you when there's no electricity and there's pillaging going on. The same thing with these survival shelters, that are, you know, communal condominium type shelters. What corporation is going to be there to open the doors for you when that happens? You've got to do it yourself. You've got to do it. And people who have money are foolish if they're not listening to my advice and starting to convert a good portion of their assets into the kind of self sufficient and preparedness options that you need to have, and secure them and conceal them. And people will bless me someday for that advice if they take it.
Yeah, and if you guys want to check out the interview that I did previously with Joel, he goes into deeper detail on how to get all of those assets prepared, what to look out for, warning signs, what you really need to know. So if you guys want to go into deeper detail, be sure to check out my first interview with Joel. I'll have a link down below if you're interested. Joel, any books that you'd recommend the audience look into? I know you've got all the books that you've published. Go ahead and name off all the books that you've published, and then any other books that you think would be beneficial for the audience to look into.
Well, the I have three major books on the market, and they're mostly to do with getting ready for a real serious crisis. Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, the go-to book, the only book on the market, frankly, about relocation for high security. The Secure Home, 700 pages, everything from A to Z on preparedness, from solar to generators to high security construction to shelters, new construction or remodeling. And then the high security shelter book is for those that are fortunate enough already to have a basement. That's their cheapest way to get a shelter. Wall off a portion of the basement, conceal it, and get your stuff hidden in a basement without windows, where nobody can get to it. And it's a lot of complications of getting to that. But you see, the most important asset probably someone and could do is to subscribe to my weekly World Affairs Brief, where I cover the geopolitical scenario from where the deep state is taking us, as far as anyone can know. And it's unique information. It's only about $1 a week for for the subscription, $48 a year, cheap by financial newsletters are concerned. But I've been dead on accuracy in my predictions for many, many years. And only now am I questioning what I thought about the deep state, because everybody's up in the air now about what are they trying to pull on us this time.
Yeah,
But anyway,
even I don't think yeah,
worldaffairsbrief.com.
even I don't think that they really know what their next move is. I think it's all
Yeah, I
TBD.
think I think they've been thrown a curveball and they're scrambling. I
Hmm.
do. Um, but frankly, I don't like Rickard's book. Rickards has been, predicting economic collapse now since 2010, and it's not good. The trouble is, none of the people out there on the market really understand the conspiracy aspects of the deep state and how you can track it by seeing the patterns of the past. And I try to review that periodically in my World Affairs Brief when I depart from the specific analysis.
Fantastic. We'll have all those linked down below, guys, if you want to check it out.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else, Joel, before we wrap up?
Well, all I can say is I've written a special piece called The Still Small Voice of Conscience, and everybody needs to get a good handle on the little inspiration you get from divine sources and the little counters you get, devastating counters from, I think, evil sources that too also exist. And if you try to deal, I mean, anybody who's savvy, who's made something in life, they need to give credit for a lot of the calm feelings they get in conscience that confirm that you've done the right thing. And guide yourself by the warning signals that warn you about a bad investment, about things that are going to go bust, and other things. Learn to listen to that voice of conscience if you're going to make it through these difficult times to come.
Great. Well, fantastic, Joel. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your time. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to comment down below. Go, Joe, go. And like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Danny.